Let's talk a little bit today about the efficiency of a bow and arrow in a ancient long-term survival situation. And this is just kind of a fun topic to talk about. It's not really relevant to any of us today, but people either forget or they don't realize to begin with that hunting is actually a really inefficient way of sustaining yourself. And the reason being, if you're running around in the woods with a bow or even an atlatl, that predates the bow, to rely on killing something all the time to eat it is really a difficult thing to do. A person can expend a lot of calories in the pursuit of game compared to how much they actually gain when they kill something. It's not like they could just go out and kill a deer every 2 weeks and eat it in that amount of time and then go kill another one. Hunting is never a guarantee. Now, one might argue that there could be more deer back then, more opportunities, and they killed more. But then you can also argue that they didn't have the means of transportation to get as far away from their camp as we do. So you have this small civilization where everybody is relying on this wild meat that they have to go out and get. And I could almost see a scarcity of game, and they're having to continuously go further and further to find it. But there's other more efficient means of finding food, and simply hunting with a bow or with an atlatl is not going to be the most efficient means. Now, of course, they did it, and of course, it was very important to them. I mean, it's just one means in which they can collect their food. Otherwise, I think they would have utilized fishing quite a bit, and also gathering of wild edibles, and also gathering of particular insects that they ate. And I think, we think about that today, eating the insects, that it, sounds appalling, and they wouldn't have wanted to do that. They would have wanted meat. But that's a different time and a different culture, and the same thing kind of with the Aborigines in Australia that eat those big witchetty grubs. And it's not something that they did because they had to, but they actually enjoy it. You acquire a taste for these things. And I think that they ate a lot more of those types of things that we don't necessarily consider eating today, catching frogs and eating them and that kind of thing. And eating a lot of things that we may not necessarily want to eat on a regular basis. But to just think that these people walked out into the woods with their bows and arrows and just shot a deer every couple of weeks when they needed to eat, I don't think it happened as much as we like to think that it happened. We recreate this hunt of primitive hunting, that we take a bow and we go out in the woods and shoot a deer, and it's exciting and it is fun to do. But did it happen in that context as much as we like to think it did? I don't really think so. I think they actually they trapped a lot of deer as well, or ensnared them. I've written about this before, and kind of seen how this could play out, but without the snares in place. But thinking that primitive man would have likely twisted up heavy cordage snares and hung them over trails, well-used trails on escape routes, and then taken a team of guys and flushed the deer out of the thickets. And as they would flee, they would entangle their head or their antlers or whatnot in these heavy corded snares. Now, of course, given enough time, deer's pretty strong, he's going to break loose, but you can get one guy to watch 3 and 4 snares, and if a deer gets entangled, he can just run up and shoot it or club it or spear it or whatnot. The whole romantic idea of being in the woods and hunting probably isn't is relevant to the past as we like to think it is. And of course they did it. I'm sure that they did it. I'm sure they stocked up on animals and they shot them and they sat and waited for them. But truly, there are more efficient means of gathering food than following a deer around in hopes of getting an arrow into it. And when it comes to hunting small game, we have this argument, and what this kind of spurred on this discussion anyway was me being a part of on the forums and people talking about mountain men, and did the mountain men use bows and arrows? They had some people saying, well, they had black powder rifles, they didn't need to use bow and arrows, and other people said, well, why would you waste your powder and your shot on a rabbit or something, when you could shoot it with a bow or something. And all this kind of stuff actually isn't as relevant, because keeping in mind that a lot of these folks that lived out there, especially like the fur trappers and whatnot, they ate what they trapped. I mean, their employment was collecting fur. Now, of course, they weren't necessarily always successful, but they weren't walking around looking for rabbits and squirrels to shoot with their muzzleloaders either, or to shoot with a bow and arrow. They were, out setting traps, and then they'd go the next day and collect what they caught. They would, obviously skin and dry the furs to sell, but then they would eat the meat. They ate beaver. They ate probably just about anything that they caught, that they could possibly stomach. I mean, because that's the same thing when you're hunting in that, ancient lifestyle, is you eat what you get. So I don't think that they necessarily were running around shooting, squirrels and rabbits and that kind of thing. Did it happen? Of course it happened. Most certainly it did. But it's the same thing with the native peoples, saying, well, they were out hunting small game and squirrels and whatnot with their bows and arrows, which, sure it happens, because, if you're out on a walk or out on a hunt and a squirrel comes running across your path and it's an easy shot, you're going to take it. But also keeping in mind that they're not going to take their arrows that they just had to build with stone tools and shoot it up into a tree where they may never see it again, or shoot something with a stone point that took time to make. They would maybe have had particular arrows that, just had blunt wood tips or sharpened wood tips or whatnot. I'm sure that happened more often than not. They didn't waste their stone points and stuff on small game. But even the arrows in general, if a squirrel's hanging on the side of a tree and you shoot at it, you're pretty much gonna ruin your arrow. And there's a lot of time invested in making these things, and of course they had to eat. And if they're hungry enough, they're gonna do it. But there's more efficient means than shooting an arrow at a squirrel that will give you one meal. It's not going to feed your family, it's going to feed you. And compared to the amount of time that you spent making that arrow, did it happen? Of course it did. But it would be far more efficient to just try and trap the animal. Now, of course, the mountain men, when they brought in and they used steel traps, which are extremely efficient, where the native peoples, they use deadfall traps, I think, primarily, and some probably use some sort of snares. But, deadfall traps are extremely efficient when you're used to using them. I've made a lot of deadfall traps, and I've caught a lot of rats and squirrels and stuff in them, like nuisance stuff, even around the house, and when I lived in Montana, we had pack rats that were just constantly chewing on the side of the cabin, and I just continuously had Paiute deadfalls set up outside. I'd just walk out and there'd be a pack rat. And these people did this, probably had 100 or so at a time that they just kept out all the time. And a lot of them probably didn't even have bait. They were probably set up in front of burrows and stuff, just assuming that eventually they'll come out and they'll trigger it and knock it over. And about like anything else, it was just part of their daily chore to just walk these routes and check these little deadfall traps. It's a lot more efficient to set up a rock to squish a rabbit or a squirrel or a rat, as opposed to being out there with a bow and arrow trying to shoot something that's this big, that's really fast, and then you got to sneak up on it, then you actually have to shoot it and hit it, and then hope that it doesn't ruin the stuff that you're using. So, it just kind of plays into another part that the bow and arrow or the atlatl or any of the, these primitive weapons are probably not as important as we like to think they are. They're not as relevant. And of course they hunted with them. Of course they killed game with them. But it's only one means of collecting the food. It's not their only means. There are more efficient ways of doing so.